Good evening, gamers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Games with Dave. Tonight I am joined by Caleb Wimble from Sojourn RPG Publishing. Caleb is currently running a Kickstarter for a totally awesome OSR style adventure called Let Us Build a Tower. It is, I'm going to try to remember this from the top of my head, a Bronze Age adventure.
Yes, it
All
is
right.
a mythic Bronze
Mythic
Age.
Bronze Age Adventure. All right. So, welcome to the show, Caleb. Thanks so much for coming on.
Hi, thanks so much for having me on here, Dave, and hi to everybody watching and listening.
Yeah, welcome to the show. And so, man, what got you into gaming? And like, as when you were a kid, and like, how old were you? And
I always liked games in general from the earliest time I can remember. I got really into role-playing games, specifically probably when I was around, I don't know, 9 or 10, and in a very roundabout way because Dungeons and Dragons and by association other published RPGs were not allowed in my family's household during the middle of the Satanic Panic and everything. So it
same
looks like
here.
you made, yeah,
Yeah.
the same sort of deal. So did you do a similar thing growing up where you just sort of wound up inventing the games with your friends or siblings or anything?
No, prior to the real panic, my brother had been into D&D, and my dad was fine with it. My mom,
Hmm.
not so much. And then the panic started, and my brother kind of hid his books, and I knew he had hidden his
Mm.
books. And I was like, "You're going to teach me how to play." And he's like, "You're not playing with us," because he was 11 years older than I was.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's like, "Dude, you're not playing with us." And I'm like, "Well, mom's going to find out where your books are." And I just kind of walked off. It wasn't quite that exact phrasing, but and then I
Mhm.
walked, and he's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, whoa. What do you want to know?"
The forbidden knowledge.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I got into it, but yeah.
Okay, so not too dissimilar, but I'm the oldest of my 5 younger siblings, so didn't have the books to pass down, so we kind of just wrote our own games. We and from the idea that we had from media of what role playing games were supposed to be, so we had a really weird mix of rules initially. And that sort of, eventually came to by the time I was in college, got to actually experience the real thing. Had a professor who ran D&D games as part of acting and improv classes. That was like
Nice.
sort of the entree in there, and had a blast, started running games, started writing them, did some contract work for a while for some like a larger games company folks doing adventures, and then in more recent years started publishing my own.
Nice. That's awesome, and so Sojourn was born.
It
So,
so was.
nice. So, aside from, like, tabletop RPGs, what are some other, I guess, not maybe genres that are some of your favorites that you're really into, like collectible card games, board games?
Oh, okay. Yeah, like so in the game space generally, I would say I really enjoy board games, but I'm not one of the people who has like all the new releases every given year. It's like I have friends who are those walls upon walls collection that are always introducing me to new stuff that I love, but I tend to come to things years later. Like I only found out I got into Wingspan like 3 years ago or something, which was probably like 10 years
Yeah.
after it had its huge explosion. I just played Scythe for the first time at one of the Strategicon conventions in Southern California earlier this year. So that's how far behind am I on those. I love them. But and then when I was younger, I played Magic the Gathering and stuff. But I play a lot of role playing games these days. And if it's not role playing games, I'd say more often video games, just because it's harder to get people together for a board game in the same way.
It is.
And when I do get people together, we usually play the role playing game. So if we're online and on our computers at home, I'll usually play, computer games with friends and stuff. I got 3 Baldur's Gate 3 campaigns going with my
Wow.
with my partner and other friend groups, all these different parties. So I don't know how many hours we've put into that.
I have yet to play it, and I'm on the same kinda, I guess you'd say, level with you as games. 'Cause I just played
Mhm.
Catan for the first time last
Oh
year,
wow. How'd you
and
like it?
I had so much fun. I went out and I bought it, my friend that taught me how to play moved, and I completely forgot how to play it, and so then it's like I had to relearn it, but it's still such a fun game, except for I hate the thief, it's like
Oh
I
yeah, yeah.
'cause always seem to be the one to get blocked by.
And sometimes you get those games where it's like 7, 7, 7, just
Yeah.
over and over again. Yeah.
Yes. Yep, and he's just and there's, "Oh, we're gonna put him on this wheat over here. We'll put him on this wood over here," and it's like, "Guys, these are all where I need to build. Come on." So, with Let Us Build a Tower, what are some of the games that inspired it?
Oh boy, a lot of inspirations here. Mythology and things that I like to read and enjoy learning about inspired it as much as anything. In the game space, the biggest RPG influence by far was The Gardens of Yin by Emmy Cave Girl Allen, which is a really, really fantastic adventure into a sort of a mythic fairyland of a kind with a lot of cues from Alice in Wonderland and those other sort of like through a portal kind of fantasy into a strange garden elfin world. And it has really brilliant systems for generating this strange and changing world that gets stranger and more magical and otherworldly, alien, and terrifying the further into it you get, and it's
Yep.
different every time you do. And that was a huge inspiration for Let Us Build a Tower. Along with other depth crawl games in the OSR space, Castle Gargantua, The Vast of Night. And I knew I wanted to build a Tower of Babel game. I knew that I wanted confusion, the curse of chaos that confuses languages and the world around the tower to be a core element. And once I started playing those depth crawl games like Gardens of Yin, I was like, oh, this is the kind of generative system I'm looking for. I want this to be a strange and changing place, a place that transforms the people that go into it, and that the farther you push in, the stranger things become, the higher you go towards heaven in this case, and a very let's say like much different version of heaven than what we might think of today with what that conjures up.
Yeah, because Let Us Build a Tower takes place in the ruins of Tower of Babel, correct?
Yeah, I sort of say that it is an apocalyptic setting, not quite post-apocalypse because it's so recent in what has happened in like King Nimrod, called the Cursed King here, who builds, unites all humankind in the myth and builds this tower to heaven and royally pisses off the father of the gods.
Right.
And depending on the version you read, it's a story that changes in different tellings across different times in human history, from like the early legendary Sumerian account and Mirkar and the Lord of Arada, all the way to thousands of years later to the biblical account that most of us are way more familiar with in Genesis. And it's like after this war on heaven and earth has been fought, there's this city of a thousand tongues is all but abandoned, and the tower is the tower is still, everything else around it basically lies in ruins. So it's very much focused on being that these are adventurers called throne seekers here, seeking the supposed ultimate prize of the throne of heaven at the top of the tower. And it's taking that classic adventure trope, but if people here who are obsessed over the same idea that took Nimrod, and the idea of becoming like the gods above, and common theme in a lot of myths, that hubris, and I wanted to really explore that progress and that danger, that survival, that I wanted to capture a lot of those things that we think of in like really high level campaigns that people almost never get to because it takes so long in a D&D campaign before you're actually getting up to dealing with gods and angels and mythic monsters and things. So I wanted to have a sort of more compressed version of that into the tower that really takes you into this, from this physical realm to the spiritual and otherworldly realm in a more, it's still a huge and vast space, but it's funneling you up, right? It's you're naturally drawn to the top of this tower, and you can, in not too many adventures, have, if you play your cards right, have a decent chance of making it pretty high up there.
Nice. That is awesome. Um, well, sorry, just had a complete brain lapse there for a moment. What was it that motivated you to go? We've brought up that it's OSR. What motivated you to go OSR versus, say, just Sojourn system
Mhm.
or with a different, like a particular system? Or is it almost system agnostic in a way? Or
I did what I always want in adventures and what I love in OSR projects, which is it's built for both. In short, basically, it's got its own take on the Sojourn system, like tailored to unique classes for this setting, for this mythic Bronze Age setting, and it's a totally unique magic system based around these tablets, these Babel stones. They're cuneiform writings, then the formation of magic through putting words together, because language is such a big part of the story of Babel, right?
right,
And of tongues in here. But I also wanted it to be as broadly compatible as possible with dungeon crawling games, especially across the OSR space, the NSR space. So I just did both. Everything in here, you'll find the full stat blocks for Sojourn, and you'll find the full, descriptions and character abilities and monster abilities and all that. And you'll also find a nice little OSR block. And depending how things go with the stretch goals, we may also get some conversions and conversion kits in here for newer editions as well. But as written, as it is currently, and as it stands to be published, it'll be broadly compatible with OSR systems. Most NSR systems, like Cairn or Into the Odd, shouldn't have too much problem. And early editions of the world's most popular role playing game.
excellent, fantastic. So you've spoken of the tower, and the way I read it is it changes every time players
Mm-hmm.
go into it. How hard was that to design to make that so that you mentioned a lot of tables on the Kickstarter page, and then
Mm-hmm.
the changing. So the tables play into that a lot of that ever changing tower, or
They do, yeah, and a core part of the design, and I think this was the most brilliant and inspiring part of the Gardens of Yin for me. I also didn't mention the Dark of Hot Springs Island, and Hot Springs Island in general was another big influence because of the, I think, really remarkable things it does with not just dungeon generation, but bringing an ecosystem of characters and monsters to life in a way that are constantly moving and changing. So a core part of that is that this is not just this is not just a kit for building an adventure. It's not up to the GM to like go and roll up all these things from tables. Tables do play a big part, but there are these parts of the world that are familiar and fixed. So you'll have like chambers, for instance, and dozens upon dozens of these unique kinds of rooms that you might encounter in the tower, basically. And I say rooms, but some of them are much, much larger areas. And when you enter into one of those, they'll have very distinct things about them that change each time, and those will be the sort of things that, yeah, here's the table that changes the type and character of the room. But there are also features for each of these chambers, and those are randomly generated as well, within a band. So the higher you go in the tower, the stranger and more dangerous the types of the chambers you will encounter and the types of features they may have, but it really changes them drastically based on. So you may have, um, say, like one of the early things that you might encounter is this banquet hall, or a pleasure dome, or an antediluvian menagerie. That is this menagerie of pre-flood creatures and animals that have been brought into this display for King Nimrod's court. But while each of those will have very different things that can be found in them, and there are, there's a very robust encounter system in this game with moving NPCs and monsters and their changing agendas. The features that might occur, especially the higher you go, can drastically change that room. Like it might be something like the room on the simpler side, the chamber is crumbling or it's flooded. or there's graffiti all over the place, and graffiti has these special messages, or it might be afflicted by unclean spirits. There might be like a possession of this place, an indwelling of these things. It might be gigantic. It might be built for creatures larger than humans. And things get stranger and stranger from there the higher you go. The room might be changing size, or it could be floating in various ways, or out of time. And it totally changes the nature of the space. And so it might be, even as a GM, I've run this game for playtest groups and home groups and convention groups between 20 and 30 times this year, I want to say. So I'm
Wow.
returning to it a lot. And I love the fact that I can be surprised by the things that we're encountering each time, and the changing tower, and players become familiar with things. And there are things they can do as characters to keep the tower the same way. There's rituals, there's sacrifices that they can sacrifice these powerful magic tablets, the Babel stones, to fix the tower in place if they want to return to it the way that it is and to certain parts of it. But there's also, I find players get really excited about this element. Oh God, we need to escape. We need to leave and come back. And we're gonna try things differently. We're gonna see how the place has changed, and we're gonna look for these familiar things in a new setting. Maybe the same characters that we met, but in a changed tower. And cut me off if I'm rambling too long.
Oh, no.
But a
I'm loving
a-
hearing about this. Like, it's painting such great imagery in my head of what you're trying to do. And like, just I'm seeing like the tower shifting
yeah.
and just kind of at points, even when you were talking about the crumbling tower and how it was out of time, I was picturing from like the Loki series
Mm.
when they were viewing all the timelines out of that tower. How there
Oh, right.
were
Yeah,
the
yeah.
islands of different places just kind of floating there, and I'm loving it, man, so don't feel like you're rambling.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to do, is like spark the imagination in those places, especially like when you get to the higher entries, at the risk of spoilers for people who might play it, like when things begin to interfere, to overlap with heaven and with hell in this game. And those are places that you can go through the tower, and expand out into these larger settings that change the way that reality works, that the rules work, that physics work the higher that you're going. The player characters will be changing drastically as well. They can either resist um these divine transformations that start to happen the closer they come to heaven, or they can embrace and change. And in some ways, some of them are kind of familiar, like the sort of mutations you might have in Gamma World or something like that, but in a lot more supernatural and sometimes beneficial or detrimental or just interesting ways that change the way you interact with the world. And I guess the last thing I would say on this, since I've been going so long on your question, is part of the reason I built the app was hugely influenced by David Sherdwan's work over Technical Grimoire. He's built these wonderful web apps for a number of OSR games, including the Stygian Library, the Gardens of Yin, and Hot Springs Island. So that was sort of a lot of overlap with my favorite things there. The app that I built for this effectively really streamlines a lot of the GM side work, to the point where I don't even need to prepare if I know that I'm going to be running on the app for a given session, because I can click a button, generate the entire tower, the layout of each floor that will be encountered, the sprawling chambers, their connections, the characters, where they're moving, will they be encountered, the different events that happen at different times. All of that gets automated, the transformations, the treasures, the traps. And the game is not dependent on the app in any way, because I am not a fan of the tendency for a lot of board games now to be dependent on an app that, sometimes disappears after 10 years. So
Yeah.
I wanted this to be a downloadable app that people could keep and not have to rely on the website staying up or being on the app store or anything. It'll be around for as long as computers can still run the code for the thing. But also that you can do the game entirely old-fashioned style, by the book. I've done it many times. I often will pre-roll a few things just to prepare for session a bit more, but I do really love having that element of what the app brings to it. And just when I'm on the go or not expecting to be running it, or at a convention, especially, it's been a huge help to me. So I think it really will enhance the experience for a lot of people if they don't mind having one little piece of technology at the table, or if they're playing online, than a Discord or Roll20 or the so many other ways to play games these days.
Yeah, the app looks, like, intense, with, like, how you can just build the dungeon, and I was looking at it earlier, and I'm like, "This is so cool because I would love to just have a tablet there
Hmm.
or something so that I could run that and just be like, bloop, at the push of a button, and everything's ready." And how long has the app been in the works, like, prior to launch of the Kickstarter?
That was this year. I'd say like the game has been in gestation for about 5 or 6 years. I have to look back at those Discord timestamps for when I was first talking with friends and like, I really want a Tower of Babel. Again, why has nobody made that a dungeon that I know of? Um, at the time. The app was really this year that I decided that I wanted to make that. I had made Excel spreadsheets for myself to automate a lot of things for testing purposes because
Yep.
I knew I was going to be doing so much playtesting that I wanted to just be able to quickly generate whole different versions of the tower for different playtests and try a lot of things. And the more expansive that got, and the bigger these spreadsheets got, and the macros I was doing, I'm like, you know what? It wouldn't be that much more to make it an app, and it turned out it was a lot more work. It was it was a good 2 months of burning the midnight oil, many like. But I haven't coded. I haven't done heavy coding in a long time. It's more of an on and off hobby for me these days than like 15 years ago when it was something I did for work a lot more. But it turns out it's like riding a bike in some ways, and I had a lot of fun building it. And it actually really helped me hone the design of the tabletop game itself too, as I was having to hard code a lot of things and starting to think about the math a lot more specifically. I think that's one advantage of testing with an app and or even people who don't know how to code an app or don't want to do all that. Even just automating things on a spreadsheet, it's a really fast way to start to see how the numbers are working behind your game. If that's something that you're interested in, game design and progression and figuring out, because time is finite. There's only so many groups that I can run through so much of the tower in life, and so many friends that I can book. Hey, you want to play? Let us build a tower. um, or folks at conventions who've been a blast to play with. And so yeah, I'd really encourage anybody who is designing games and hasn't done it before. This was the first time I started working on an app as part of a tabletop game. And it really, I feel like, improved and honed a lot of the development, the building of stats and encounter rates, and being able to very quickly get a feel for what is it like to go through this tower very quickly, even before I bring it to the table and bring it to a group to test with. I find that's a huge advantage of doing this kind of development.
Interesting, that makes perfect sense, but I've never thought of it that way because I would think it's almost like doing a play test in itself,
Hmm.
having the spreadsheet and then turning it into an app and kinda seeing how things would flesh out. So
Yeah, it kind of is, and I'll be honest. I know some people are feel weird about this with RPGs. I started doing a bunch of solo gaming during COVID, along with a lot like during the lockdowns, I should say, along with online groups, and started finding that even though it's tricky which adventures you can use to keep yourself surprised as a player in a game, unless it's designed to be a GM-less game. Certain adventures lend themselves better than others, or I found if you put things in spreadsheets and automate. I started playing modules on my own when I didn't have somebody to run them for me as a player or to run for others as a GM. And it's not, obviously, I don't think the experience compares to playing with a group at all. That's what I do constantly. There are few things I love more than playing actively at the table with friends in an RPG. But I did find that solo gaming and rolling up my own whole party of characters and very quickly going through dungeons, because you make decisions a lot faster when you're one person and you're a little less attached to any given PC, so a lot more death and dismemberment in the
right.
in yeah, in the mill. I did find that it's been a fun a fun side thing that has also really given me a new appreciation for RPG design. Even though nothing compares to playing with an actual group at the table and the chaos that comes with everybody's imagination and
Mm.
collaboration. You can't do that yourself. But it was really helpful for me in being able to do a lot more ways of playing around with this world than I would have been able to only with those playtest sessions.
That is really cool. Like, I've never thought of it doing something like that, but it makes sense because I have a friend that used to do a blog,
Mhm.
and he created a spreadsheet to help him come up with ideas. He made 7 or 8 columns and made a macro that would pull various words of, like, do an interview on
Yeah,
this
yeah.
and whatever, or, like, do an expose on this, and it was like it helped him, so it makes sense from a gaming perspective. Um, it's funny because you brought up running 4 characters at once, and it is funny doing that because you do kinda get to that point of like, "Oh, he died, still got 3 more, we'll keep on
Yeah.
going," you know?
Uh-huh.
And it's really funny that you brought that up. Um, so I'm a random table fiend,
Mm,
and that's one of the things I saw listed on there where that there were not a bunch, you said there were powerful tables that led to generating a lot of different things within Let Us Build a Tower.
yeah.
How many tables do you know right off the top of your head? I know
Oh,
you are in the book
let
itself.
do you mind? Let me take a quick scroll and guess
Okay.
at going through my InDesign document here. Um, oh boy, I would say the vast majority of chambers in the tower have their own tables. There's I'm going to say more probably more than 100, but I don't want to
Awesome.
like give that give that number that's not representative of anything necessarily, but me just glancing through, taking a wild gander between the page count and the number of tables. It might be 200, but I'm not a person who should be trusted with just glancing at things. And it hadn't occurred to me to add up the number of tables in total, but it is something that I also love in modules that have like really well thought out tables that keep things fresh and exciting and new without feeling like lol random necessarily. I like to feel that they're, and I do enjoy a good funhouse dungeon, and I enjoy a good, Tegel Manor style. What is going on here? Like one room has, or like Castle Amber. Like, well, the first room has ghosts in a boxing or zombies in a boxing match, and then there's this horrific nightmare shadow dragon 2 rooms over. I can enjoy that as well. But yeah, I'm also a huge table fiend. I love the. Are you familiar with Matt Finch's Tome of Adventure Design
I
by
am.
chance? The Toad?
I've got the original and I've got
Yeah,
the updated version that he just put out. I think it was this year, wasn't it? That he
yeah.
did the
Well,
Kickstarter or
either
last
this or
year?
last year. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's a
Um,
fantastic book.
oh my God, yeah. I am constantly surprised how much it sparks imagination. Like just a few minutes of rolling on those prompts for
Yeah.
like it just coming up with an adventure or setting or dungeon.
Yep. Um, Another one that's got a lot of tables that makes it really fun. Have you played Pirate Borg?
Not Pirate Borg yet. No, I've got to.
Pirate
Mork
Borg
Borg is
is a
cool as hell.
blast because it is like, if you want to, you can do everything completely randomly of the game,
Okay.
and it is so fun because we were sitting. I played a couple weeks ago, and I don't mean to kick off from your game at all,
No,
but it
no, no,
just
no.
has
By all
happened to
means.
pop into my head. I played at the game store up the road from me, Crossroad Games, and we completely randomly generated all of our characters, all 4 of us
Hmm.
that were playing. And as we're going along, the GM was rolling what was happening. And it was so fantastic because he'd sit there laughing. He's like, okay, the ship is coming
Yeah.
up, and then the skeleton shark attaches to your ship. And we're
Uh
like,
huh.
what? And it was all because of the tables. And I love when that kind of randomness can happen at the table. Kind of like how you were saying the boxing zombies. and the shadow dragon. It's just
Hmm.
like, what? Where did these all come from? And
Yeah,
it's great though.
it definitely helps things feel as a GM, it really keeps you on your toes in a lot of ways, right? It keeps you, and I think there a lot of people like to play. I feel like really pre-written adventure paths, and I used to play a lot of those. And there's nothing, nothing wrong with that style of game at all. But there's something really exciting about coming to the table, right, and not nobody knowing what's going to happen. The GM doesn't know where the session is
Yeah.
going to go because of that element of chaos and wonder. And I think that's something that's really fun and special in RPGs as a medium.
Yeah. It's just the unpredictability of everything,
Mhm.
or not necessarily unpredictability, but just like winging it, man, of like just having fun, and making stuff up as you go. It's great.
Yeah,
Like you were saying with your siblings, you made up all the games that you played, and it's like so cool to be able to do that. Yeah.
yeah.
um, Another thing that I thought was really cool is I don't remember the count that you put in there, but were the monsters. It looks like you've got a lot of
Mm.
monsters that you've signed for this adventure.
Mhm.
Are they all of your design, or did you have some other folks that designed some monsters that came in help you out that are kind of like guest stars in the book? Or
I did pretty much the entirety of the writing and design. There were one or two ideas for some cool chamber features from some wonderful folks who are going to be shouted out in the credits. But no, the monsters were all that was all my work. Not the illustrations for all of them. I did a small handful, but our team of artists is just incredible, and they bring them to life in a way for me sometimes that I'll be sending out the description and the idea of what this encounter is like, what these creatures are, and sometimes they'll really nail the essence of what I'm looking for, and they'll also bring something new to it that inspires other things. So definite credit to the artists on the team who have inspired me to go new directions that I wasn't expecting necessarily, but changed the way I was thinking about a monster. So that's been a huge part of it. Some of the creatures are going to be new takes on familiar beings, and that sort of comes with it being like this mythic Bronze Age this mythic Bronze Age setting too, I think. So like something like the Lamasu, or that gets, I think, traditionally called the Shedu in D&D, that sort of famous Mesopotamian and especially Babylonian godlike chimera creature,
yep,
whether it's the body of a bison and lion and human and winged and all these elements to it that the guards, like the gates of Babylon and things like that. So a new elements and background and behavior for creatures like that who are going to be part of shared myth. And I want it because this game is on the crossroads of changing myth and this movement from one set of religions and gods to another as part of the sort of the informed backstory for this setting. It's sort of at that, a lot of these are at that crossroads of the way that the myths that were from originally ancient Sumer and then the Akkadian Empire and all the way into the Assyrian empires and to Babylon and to Babylonia, that changed form until you get to so you have these familiar gods who are actual characters and beings who show up in the tower, who have fallen from their places of glory, sort of reflecting like King Nabonidus of Babylon, who in this like near the very end of the empire is trying to move away from this belief in all these individual gods and all these cities, and each of them being like equally powerful and important and part of the world in their own right, to trying to push everybody towards worshiping his favorite god and claiming this as a unified being over all of these. So the story of the game and the creatures themselves reflect these changing worlds and clashing ideas of myth becoming something new. So there are things in here that are from the very like extremely Mesopotamian, Sumerian, like Akkadian myth, and then there are things that are more biblical and even Enochian. And so angels are a big part of this story, whether that is
nice.
angels and in like the Lamassu sense, or angels in the be not afraid sense of, creatures from like Ezekiel's vision, like terrifying, utterly incomprehensible beings beyond human understanding that we're just trying to give shape and form to because they're part of this world that is possibly even deadly just to look at for humans, and that you have to change in some way to become a part of this. So yeah, there's all those creatures. There's big hitters from Sumerian myth and from the Epic of Gilgamesh. There'll be the like the battle bison of heaven, and possibly even some appearances from some heroic mythic characters like Gilgamesh and Enkidu themselves. So yeah, there's a very wide variety that I hope we've gotten united here in a way that just tells a story in itself, as characters, as player characters are encountering these changing, clashing worlds, and the clashing of like the heavenly world and the world of the afterlife and the underworld, all these things meeting in the tower, and humanity trying to join with the gods here.
And I am so blown away that you have been able to fit all this within 120 pages, because it sounds like an epic, like just an epic adventure. So I cannot wait to play it, man. So it's going to be a boatload of fun. So with the monsters, if you want to kind of skate around this one a little bit, by all means do so. If you don't want to give anything away, but which was your favorite to design?
Mm.
And which would you say was the hardest monster to design?
Oh, good question. Okay, let me take a brief scroll through some of my notes and play docs here and see. Um, I'd say on a conceptual level, I really like some of I know I just talked about the angels, but I like the idea of these ineffable beings who warp reality simply by their being here. And there's some overlap between, I think, those the mythic stories of humans encountering things that weren't meant for humans, and even I think we get to this in Lovecraftian and Eldritch fiction as well. The idea of there, it's like alien beings who are beyond our
Right.
comprehension, these ancient elder gods and stuff. And I feel like that's captured in a lot of these stories of when humans like see this thing that they're trying to describe, and they're like, oh my, eyes and wheels on fire and burning and shifting faces, and of one face like an animal, like one like an ibex, and one like a lion, and one like a human, but it's not human. So I wanted to try and find cool ways of getting those sort of creatures that warp reality around them when they show up, with the ophanim, the like, and these throne creatures described in the biblical stories like Daniel, Ezekiel, and the Apocalypse of John, and things like that, mixed with mixed in with a dungeon crawling setting where these are all creatures that players might try to fight at some point, and who are impossible threats when you start
Yeah.
out. You do not want to, if you try to just run up the tower when you're first beginning this, you can do that. You can behold these horrors and succumb to them, or you can go through the process of exploring and changing and finding ways to, to bind some of these creatures with, like, for instance, angelic names, and the understanding of the rules of their world, and this and transformation of the player characters to be able to more deal with these things. So I'd say those were the most fun to define the different angels and mythic monsters, especially. Although I did also really love the unclean spirits, and who are these things that will become demons in mythology. And the hardest to design, I think, was the other thing you asked.
Yes.
I would say the gods themselves, the great fallen ones in this case, because most of them are now fallen from this war in heaven, where this Sky Father, a being called the Sky Father, has set himself up as God of gods, King of kings, and declaring like sole domain over this world, and against the gods who sided with humanity, or that humanity built like these temples to in building the tower. And I think representing a god, a literal god in a game setting, and mechanizing that but also trying to capture what gods meant in these mythologies, and in a world where, for somebody who lives in like the city of that the god of the city is a fully real and present being, and a different being from the types of humans, and somebody that can be supplicated and dealt with, and it's not just like this. um I think often like really simplified way that we tend to think about them in fantasy as, just like pure wish granters, or glorified humans that are that just happen to be like supernaturally powerful. I wanted to capture something of what they actually meant in myth and in legend, and also find a way to work that into mechanics. So that was really challenging, really involved. I'm pretty excited with some of the things that are now a part of the game. And I would say that's still, I'm putting the finishing touches on things. And in the last few playtests, that's where I've been really focusing my energy, is on these encounters with the divine, what it means to sacrifice to them or to ally yourselves with some of these powers versus the others, like what their rights are, and really trying to make that feel present and also gameable, which are sometimes I think hard things. Like sometimes game mechanics make a thing knowable and mathable, right, in a way that might
Yes.
be at odds with the otherworldly, with the divine. And yeah, so that's been the biggest challenge, and another really fun part of design, I think, on the monsters and creature side.
That's awesome. And it does sound like that would be really difficult to work it all work together, you know.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned the artists a couple times.
Hmm.
Can you tell me about who they are
Yes.
and tell me a little bit about each one of them?
Okay, well, I guess we'll start with the cover, since we have two fantastic cover artists on this for the two different editions of the game, the sort of, limited run premium edition, and the hard, both hardcover. And that's Goran Gligovic, who does the main edition of the game, which is probably going to be the one, that most folks who are not collectors are grabbing or seeing at tables and things. Goran, and I'll just say, right off the bat, it's been really, really wonderful working with him and these other artists. And he has a real wonderful dark fantasy vibe to his work that I think evokes a lot of like my favorite old fantasy trade paperbacks when I was growing up, like stuff that was, a lot of it was, hand-me-down books, or my dad's book, or somebody had donated to a nearby library collection from anywhere from like 30 to 100 years before I was born. But I was really into a lot of those pulp designs that I think Goran captures really well. There's like maybe some metal influences, although I don't want to speak to his influences, but we'll just encourage people to go check out the fantastic work on his site. He has a beautiful website that I think he designed, and some of his projects are like, oh, here's like stills for like an Earthsea animated movie that he would love to see happen, and just beautiful, beautiful work. And so he did a really great rendition of the tower and the city of a thousand tongues below. Asti, full name Carlos Asti Agras, did the premium edition dust jacket version of the cover, which I think captures this beautiful, almost more psychedelic and surrealistic vision of this, these angelic creatures flying around this tower that tears into like a hole in the sky
Yeah.
above, and heaven opening up there. Like really, really cool work. Beautiful, beautiful colors, that sort of rich reds and oranges, a little bit like acid fantasy landscape. And I think Asti takes a lot of influences from traditional Mexican paintings and designs and folklore as well, in a lot of his stuff, which brings this
Nice.
really really cool color and mode of painting that people should visit his websites and videos if they want to know more of the history about the medium. And then whole team of the fantastic interior artists. I have to give a huge shout out to Dan Katinsky. One, because he's my brother and does fantastic work, beautiful illustrations, and also was a huge help with getting the Kickstarter together and putting a lot of the more things from his background in UI design and things like that into getting, I think, a pretty nice looking Kickstarter page, much better than what I was going to have going before he started working with me on that. And I think it's played a big part in people's excitement, getting people excited about all these wonderful artists who also include David North, Phil Stone, and Billy Blue, who each bring something unique to like everybody working together to get this vibe of like this rich black ink heavy comic book kind of style or classic. I think reflected in a lot of like probably that like mid to late 80s era RPGs and early 90s.
Yeah.
The vibe of those rich black and white works, things disappearing into shadow and nice thick lines that I really like on characters. And David did incredible creature designs like this, all the great serpents who are the spawn of Tiamat, the primordial goddess of the ocean, who is slain by Marduk in the Babylonian telling. Things might be a little bit between myths here and stages, and her, one of David's pieces is this absolutely incredible depiction of the killing of Tiamat and the bursting forth in her death, the waters of the ocean and all the great serpents of myth who will sort of be the consequences for the gods of what they have done in killing their primordial mother of the ocean and, Abzu of their father of the rivers. And, another common recurring thing in myth of that, the killing of the prior generation and the taking over in the change of the guard. And I think David does an amazing job bringing that to life in these images bursting with energy and kind of beautiful violence, which is also that is also a birthing of something new, which is a huge part of the themes here. Phil did a whole host of incredible character work, including you can see on the Kickstarter preview of the cursed King Nimrod himself, the mighty hunter, this Nephilim-like figure standing far taller than ordinary humans, fancying himself, now the ruler of united humankind, to be like a god, and just the like really dynamic action poses. And Billy brought a lot of fantastic work to creature designs in here as well, and into things like the behemoth, and we also have the Leviathan showing up here for some of those biblical creatures mixed in with the older myths. And there's also work by a number of artists beyond the ones mentioned in the Kickstarter pieces for some of the stock artwork in the game that like fills in the edges of things with like cool objects and designs from these worlds. And David also did a lot of work on that as well, because as it turns out, Mythic Bronze Age is pretty underrepresented, I think, in fantasy OSR spaces.
Yeah,
We have
it really is.
there's like so much medieval, a little bit of Iron Age, and then very, very little Bronze Age. And David is one of the ones who's been a huge help in bringing to life, like like what are the objects that of daily life, the treasures, the armor, the weapons of this world.
Right, because I would think back in the Bronze Age, there's no full plate armor.
No,
It's
no.
like there's nothing like that. They would have had like chest plates, I think, if I'm thinking of the right era,
Yeah,
maybe,
yeah.
and that's about it. And they weren't as durable as full plate by any means either.
No, no, you might be lucky if you have like the ear tube, which just like guards your heart, to
Yeah,
like held on this like circle there and center of organs, or you might have like late Bronze Age, the panoply of like the different not of like it's hard to describe visually, so it's probably easier for people to just go Google panoply if they're not familiar. Some of those early like Aegean developments. And but there's also a lot of, because this is a mythic space and we're moving between periods, we're not like totally beholden to just to say like to early Sumer. We can bring in some of the things like towards the farther reaches of the Bronze Age, and like the Assyrian innovations. We don't get to iron itself. We don't go to the late Assyrian, keeping it in there, but bring some variety to things. since this is a tower of all these strange innovations and some things that are out of time, so you discover, what would be mythic weapons, legendary weapons in this world that might be from things of slightly later periods and of heavenly designs in there.
One thing you've brought up a couple times that I'd like to go back to and talk about a little bit more are the Babel stones.
Mm.
Uh, what exactly they almost seem multifunctional the way you've
Mhm.
described them. So, what can you tell folks that out there that are listening that may just be hearing about Let Us Build a Tower for the first time about Babel stones and how they work in the game?
Yeah, I would love to talk about Babel
All
stones
right.
because they're one of the things that was I knew I wanted from the very beginning, and I've experimented with different ways of doing them. They've changed a lot over the course of design, and I'm really happy, and I think players have really been enjoying what they've become. So, excuse me, I'm sorry, listeners and viewers. I had mentioned at the beginning getting over being sick the last few weeks. Because we're dealing with Babel and with the confusion of languages here, one of the changes as part of this heaven's curse of chaos whenever players characters enter the tower is all their languages get confused again. This is a thing where this is a world where people who all used to speak one united tongue are now like barely able to understand each other. They have to they're disunited by this curse of chaos and have to find other ways to communicate with people who don't share their new tongue, whatever they're speaking now, these proto
Mm.
languages out of the curse. One way that players can do that very inventively is through charades and pantomime and finding creative ways in character, interacting with the environment to communicate with NPCs and with other creatures. Another powerful way is these Babel stones, which are these shattered magical clay tablets, which are part of these tablets in true history were a core part of the development of Mesopotamian civilization, the development of cuneiform script writing that became the backbone of so many early languages and allowed communication across vast distances and was often used like it's almost this superpower in itself to be able to read in this world because we're talking about a world much like real early Bronze Age period where only a very tiny class of people like scribes and accountants are usually the ones who are actually able to read and to write in the wedge cuneiform writing on these clay tablets. And so there's a big advantage for player characters who are scribes and who can interact with and read these things. But the magic of the Babel stones is the ability to communicate words, ideas, and concepts across languages magically. So if you collect a lot of these Babel stones, you start out with a number and you meet folks and you can trade for them. You could do violence to get them if that's the kind of characters that you are in the party, and you'll find them throughout the course of exploring the tower. They expand your ability to communicate and to talk and across language barriers, but they also form the basis of the unique system of spell casting of magic, which is putting different Babel stones, these words, concepts, and ideas together to form magic, to form spells that are whether that is a full sentence or a simple declaration or a combining of these tablets together to create magical effects, and which often involves sacrificing the Babel stones or risking sacrificing them to create these powerful magics or rituals like the one I mentioned of sealing the tower against the change of the curse of chaos. So they're tools for communication, they're tools for creation of magic and wonders, and they're also extremely valuable currency. And characters can extract the power. They can trade them for very valuable things, artifacts, magical wondrous items, or for whatever they need to survive, for weapons and armor, for bribes or supplies for getting where they need to go in the tower. And that's this trade-off they're making, and they can also even extract the power from them to take it into themselves to increase their abilities as characters. So you're constantly in this deciding of what do we do with these Babel stones, these resources that do so many things for us. How are we going to use them? What sacrifices will we make? Will we offer them to the gods? And which is this constant I think back and forth of the dynamic of exploring the tower is what sacrifices characters will make, what changes they will undergo.
And the Babel stone sounds so darn cool. Um, I love the imagery that it gives me of basically like taking 3 stones or something to
Hmm.
combine, having them kinda light up, and then boom, they do something, that's just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, and I can't take credit for the concept of words on graven objects producing magic, of course. And one of the many inspirations in designing this was I played for the first time the other year the 1992 classic Ultima Underworld, the Stygian Abyss game for DOS. Uh,
Yeah, that was
uh, and I don't know how many people watching or listening would have played that one that sort of influenced the whole genre of of open world RPGs and mega dungeons and of immersive sims and later games like Thief and System Shock and things like that. But the runes in Ultima have like they're a similar idea in that game of combining these rune concepts to produce different magical effects. And I was like, what? I have hardly played any tabletop RPGs that brought that and combined it with the language idea in a way that would have player. And the part of the fun of being at the table too is that you're not just limited to the things that the designer that I have put down in the book of here's like all the combinations you can do. The sky is really the limit for
right.
imagination, and there are tools for the players and GM for like, well, here's how powerful these things can be. Here's the scope of the magic, the range, the number of creatures it can affect based on how much you sacrifice, based on how many stones are part of this. But the possibilities are still very, very inventive, imaginative, up to players at the table who in the groups I've played with like are always coming up with incredible new combinations of words and concepts that take the adventure in new directions, and I think introduce this really fun element of controlled chaos and wonder that the players get to be a part of controlling. So it's not just the tower that is imposing its will on them, or these divine aspects of change and chaos, but that they can be a part of shaping and changing this world here that's all malleable in that curse.
Awesome. That is so cool. And yeah, that's gotta be kinda, interesting GMing, and they're like, "Yeah, we're gonna do this," and you're like, "All right, I wasn't expecting that, but we're gonna roll
Hmm.
with it." Um, do you have any kinda time limit? Do you have to or anything
Uh,
with
I have got a hard out in 30 minutes.
Okay,
But whatever you want to talk about,
okay.
and if I've already taken up your time, then
No,
however.
I'm having a blast talking about the game, but one of the other things I wanted to touch on was what you've got on your shirt is Sojourn,
Oh, sure.
your RPG system.
Mhm.
Before we do that, is there anything with Let Us Build a Tower that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'm sure there's a million things, and I
Mhm.
could go into any of these things rambling about the things that excite me. But if folks go to the Kickstarter page, we get a lot of the high level elements of it there, and I'm happy to chat about any of the particular components there. If people, whether they want to shoot me a message or go on socials or comment on their Kickstarter, I am more than happy to talk about whatever folks are interested in. But let's see, is there anything else I really want to? Um,
'Cause I was thinking the
yeah,
same thing,
it'd
like
be
high level, I think we hit everything. But before we do jump into Sojourn, why don't we go over the different tiers for
oh,
backers?
sure. Yeah, so they're pretty simple as Kickstarter tiers go. I wanted to keep this to what I knew we could deliver in a timely manner, and I wanted this to be, since it is so not Sojourn RPG Publishing's first game, but first Kickstarter. Wanted to make sure that we're going to be hitting those delivery dates for folks. You can back it and just get the PDF, which will be fully hyperlinked because that's something that I really value as a GM, is being able to click on any part of it, get to
Bookmarks
the
and
yes.
yeah.
It makes a difference, I think, in how usable they are. And even people who back it, even just the digital edition will also get early access to the web app beta
Nice.
before it goes out to the wide world. The app will be free, to be clear, but the backers will get a much earlier look and use of it than everyone else. It is complete currently. It is the full generator, but I would love to add more bells and whistles to it with our stretch goals. And there will inevitably in the beta still be some bugs that I'm sure I have not found them all, and people and who are part of the early access can be a part of finding and reporting. So you get to be that sort of Steam early access game playtester on the app as well. Even at the basic digital edition, you can back the standard book, which is that wonderful cover by Goran. You can back the premium physical edition, which is that sort of deluxe, like very classically cloth bound, embossed, and dust jacket covered edition with the with Asti's work of art on the dust jacket, and it will still be just as good for a play piece. But for a lot of folks I know, like me, who I think that they're playing a lot, they sometimes want to have a table copy, and they sometimes want to have that collector's copy that they're
Yep.
that they're going to keep nice. We have higher tiers like Tower Collector, where you can get both of them in one, along with all the digital goals. You can get an adventuring party set where you have the three of the standard ones for your players and one of the deluxe for you as GM. And then we have the much larger bulk, like Throne Seeker ones of the premium edition, which is especially for booksellers and the like. Those who don't want to do a massive order, but who just want to get a handful for their stores. If they're a small indie game shop, is a useful one there.
Nice. Awesome. So, like I was saying, I'd love to jump into Sojourn if you've got a few more minutes and kind
Mm-hmm.
of talk about that. Um, what can you tell folks if you were to give the elevator pitch for the system? What would it be? I guess would be the way to say it.
Oh, okay, yeah. So to be clear, for Sojourn, the game, not Sojourn RPG Publishing, now the company that I'm putting out Let Us Build a Tower through. The elevator pitch for Sojourn would be, and I really should have this off the top of my head, but I'll make something up now, because I didn't do the whole Kickstarter thing for Sojourn. I wanted to capture my favorite elements of old school freeform dungeon and wilderness adventure design, and the really elegant parts I like about some of the earliest dungeon crawling systems, especially. And I wanted to streamline that and address a lot of the things that have come through play groups that I've run over the decades now, and my home groups, and many others, and the things that attract them about new school design, and about a lot of the innovations that we've seen in the both the OSR and the NSR, the new school revival. Exciting new mechanics and ways of thinking about these really rock solid core concepts, and putting those things together into something new and fast. And this sentence has gone on forever, but something I could have to be, originally when I was designing it for me, to have this system that I could run, and brought all my favorite elements of those things and the new mechanical ideas I had, and that I loved in the scene, and yeah, and make that accessible, make it fast, and also make it robust enough to support long campaigns and adventures. Um, so that's the elevator pitch. But like an example of what I was trying to go for there is, for instance, having the four like very classic core classes of, you've got a warrior, you've got a rogue, you've got a mage, and you've got the base class of the zealot in this case, the one who is this more spiritual or religiously motivated class. And having that be, you can jump into adventures so quickly with those, and then as you level, branch out into totally unique classes across the spectrum, each with really, you can stick on the simple core of what that offers, or you can get into totally different radical magic systems, reflect for different types of magic users, and things like things that I love out of, I don't know if you're familiar with, Dave, with the Goblin Laws of Gaming,
No,
or GLOG.
I am not.
it's sort of a scene and movement that started out with Arnold Kay, and has influenced a lot of like wonderful RPG designers, like Skirples, who people know from the Monster Overhaul this past year, and a lot of wonderful mechanics that have come out of there, new ways of thinking about dice and of incorporating dice rolls into core mechanics, and just allowing a system that is both mechanically robust but flexible enough to let players and GMs together create new and exciting things for their table, the custom classes they want to see, while keeping things streamlined enough that somebody totally new to dungeon crawling can just pick it up in a single session, get it, like generate or roll a character in a few minutes or one click on the website, and then have the ability to from there go into something and to build their own campaign setting, to build their own idea of the kind of characters that and classes that would be in that world, and not just be in something really rigidly down one line. So yeah, that's I gave the very long one sentence and then the much longer paragraphs of what I wanted to build in Sojourn.
That's awesome because it's like you took what you did as a kid, brought
Mhm.
it to your adulthood and did it, and then you're giving it to other people to do the same thing that you did as a kid and are doing now, and that is so cool. Like
Yeah,
I
I never thought about that trajectory, but yeah, you're right.
I love how that all plays out. That is so neat. Um, so trying to think of how to ask this question. I always make notes of my questions, and this little note that I'm looking at, I'm like, how do I ask this right? Um, the magic with the Babel stone,
Mhm.
and then the magic system in, of course, Sojourn RPG. How much of went into developing the magic system for Sojourn influenced the Babel stone?
It was definitely the starting point, and the starting point for all the mechanics in Let Us Build a Tower, were Sojourn initially, and bringing that to a mythic Bronze Age. But then they just started taking on a life of their own and changing in different ways, because I really like systems to flow with the setting and the type of adventure that you're having, and
Yep.
the kind of story that's going to emerge at the table, right? So the magic changed dramatically, and it's things like priest in Let Us Build a Tower, who have their own divine way of interacting with the world, even though these things are kind of all the divine and the arcane are melded together in the space, because that's how people thought about the world. There wasn't that binary divide between those things. So priests in Let Us Build a Tower work pretty differently from the ones in Sojourn in some ways, because they are specifically conducting rites for their gods, for whichever one they serve within the tower, and sort of reclaiming desecrated altars and shrines, and what was taken from these fallen gods. And the way that they work is very particular to the god that they serve, and to their domain, essentially their needs, their desires. And the rites are very concrete. They're things that you do, that you with implements you've gathered, with things that you do in your actions in the tower. They're not like a list of spells for the priests in the same way.
Yep.
And then the scribes, who are doing the Babel stones, that started as a little bit Sojourn like, for like the way that the sorcerers work, if you go that in that Sojourn like higher level archetype, which was taking a lot of ideas from Glog dice, and the idea of this risk reward of how I have all these mana dice that represent like my pool of power, and how many of them do I want to risk into this spell in Sojourn with a sorcerer, or in Glog, because the more dice you're rolling, the more powerful and more dynamic that spell is going to be, but the greater the chance of something cataclysmic happening, of it backfiring, of it breaking apart, or doing something unexpected, or of losing that power, of not getting it back. So there was that risk reward element, and took a part of that into what became the system with the Babel stones. But the whole nature of doing it with words and concepts on each of these tablets, and the ways that those create a much more organic system in some ways, that's pretty different from anything that you'll find in Sojourn RPG. Um, and the other classes as well, the non-magical ones also took like started as a baseline from the Sojourn things and then went specific places for this setting. And if people are interested in checking that out, they can actually be on Sojourn. It's only it's $5 for the PDF, but there are community copies on itch as well. So anybody who can't, and I should check and make sure those have been refreshed recently. If anybody is in a place where they can't afford games and wants to take a look at what's going on there or have copies for their players, they can just go to itch.io to Sojourn's page there, and they can get those free of charge for the community copies, which are sort of a way of paying it forward from other folks who have bought the PDF or the books for that.
I will make sure I get links for all that in the description after we finish up tonight. And we probably should wrap it up. You've only got about 15 minutes or so left before you do have to go. And I have had a blast talking with you, and I hope you've had fun too.
Yeah, you are a wonderful person to talk to, Dave, and I'm sorry that I did so much of the talking at
No,
the
that's what I
at the
want,
end of the
and
day.
it's like I told you before we went live, like I am all about promoting you and let us build a tower. It's not about me. Like this has like since I started doing these interviews, it has been such a great way for me to learn about more new games that I never would have heard of otherwise. And
Mm.
I've met so many awesome people such as yourself. And yeah, this is so much fun to do. I could sit and listen to you talk about Sojourn and let us build a tower all night. So I'll have to have you back on because I did see that you're running another Kickstarter soon. I don't remember the name. I know it had Falcon in it. And
Oh,
I don't.
Falcon in the Dive. I don't 100% know if that will be a Kickstarter
Oh,
project or
okay.
not, but I will certainly be posting news about it, and we will have other Kickstarters as well. But I just wanted to make sure that we get this one and get it in everybody's hands before launching the next project. But yeah, I guess if people want to find out, that's a great reason for them to, if they're watching and haven't liked and subscribed your channel yet, so that they know everything
Yeah.
coming down the pipeline. And it's, I don't know, from the episodes I've watched so far, just an awesome resource that you've got going on here for keeping people apprised of what. And I'm now going to watch your Pirate Borg one now that you've told me a bit about it, and it
It's
sounds
funny.
really fun.
Speaking of the Pirate Borg one, when I first started doing this, I was terrified doing these interviews just because it was my first time really doing something like this, but I just knew I wanted to do it. And
Mhm.
when you go back and watch that one, you can see how nervous I am during the interview. It's hilarious for me to go back and watch them. I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I was that uncomfortable. So
Oh, I feel that intensely. And even just listening to your own voice, that takes a long time to get used
it
to, I
does.
find.
Like I
Yeah.
have to turn off monitoring because I can't do it. Like hearing my own voice throws me
Mhm.
off so bad. Well, thank you so much for coming on tonight, Caleb. I'd love to have you back another time if you're up for it. And yeah, the best of luck with you've got what, 13 days left or 12 days left? Let us build a tower.
We are, great question. I had the page open. We've got 11 days
11
left
days.
already.
Oh, geez.
201 backers have gotten us more than double the initial goal. We've hit so many of the stretch
Oh,
goals already.
let's talk
Um,
about those real quick before we go
oh,
so
sure.
folks can know what that haven't backed yet could know what they could potentially unlock backing it.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I'll wrap through those real quick. Already unlocked by our really wonderful backers are the monster token files for virtual tabletops, the
Nice.
GM screen inserts, the Mythic Shinar, a guide to wilderness adventures beyond Babel for when you want to when which sometimes player characters leave the dungeon. They want to go out into the world and see what else is
They
there.
never do that.
That Well, it's one of, we got to get the breaking glass or break glass in case of emergency option in case they do. And a custom character sheet to really reflect the things that are going to be central to, like the Babel stones in a campaign in Mythic Shinar. And we are not that far from unlocking a character generator web app, which will, allow a really robust way of like a sort of a second companion app to the GM companion app that's already there for generating characters quick on the fly. That's a wonderful thing about systems like Morkborg, that they have those really great
Yeah.
websites. And I did one for Sojourn as well for, that's a simple randomized one to just get some going, get on the table, find what you get, and once we unlock that, we'll reveal what the next mystery stretch goal is. So yeah, anybody who's interested, and yeah, I would.
Nice.
It has been great talking, Dave, and I would love to come back in the future and chat more with you about whatever, whether it's future games or other games as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, Caleb. Folks out there, have a great night. Use my arms way out of frame.